The Duke of Alderwick sat at the head of a table prepared for 20 guests. Every candle was lit, every silver plate gleamed, every crystal glass had been polished, but there was no food. No footman stood behind his chair, no maid waited beside the doors, no steward appeared to announce the first course. Only the enormous dining room clock answered him. Tick, tick, tick. Duke Leander Hawkridge glanced at his guest of honour, Lady Corisande Vellum, the woman he had installed as the new mistress of Caldermere House that very afternoon. She wore the Hawkridge emeralds that had once rested around his wife's neck. Her fingers touched them nervously. Perhaps they did not hear the bell, she said. Leander pulled the embroidered cord again. Somewhere below stairs, a bell rang sharply. Still, no one came. The other guests shifted in their chairs. Lord Fenwick pretended to study the painted ceiling. Lady Maberly whispered something behind her fan. At the far end of the table, a visiting magistrate looked toward the doors with undisguised curiosity. Leander's jaw tightened. This dinner was meant to prove that Caldermere had already forgotten Duchess Rosamond. Instead, the empty table was beginning to prove something else. "Ring again," Corisande whispered. "I have rung twice." "Then ring a third time." Leander reached for the cord. Before his fingers touched it, the dining room doors opened. Everyone turned. An elderly man entered wearing the formal black coat of the Hawkridge household. Mr. Belfry had served 3 generations of dukes. He had supervised royal visits, winter balls and dinners for more than 100 guests without misplacing so much as a spoon. Leander exhaled with relief. "Belfry, where is the first course?" The steward walked to the centre of the room. He carried no tray. "Your Grace," he said, "there will be no first course." Silence seized the table. Leander stared at him. "What did you say?" "There will be no dinner served at Caldermere tonight." One of the guests coughed into his hand. Corisande's face reddened. Leander rose slowly. "Where is the kitchen staff?" "Gone." "The footmen?" "Gone." "The maids?" "Gone." "The wine steward?" Mr. Peveril departed before sunset. Leander looked around at the empty walls as though the servants might be hiding behind the portraits. "Who gave them permission to leave?" "No one, Your Grace." "Then summon them back." "I cannot." Leander's voice dropped. "Why not?" Belfry met his gaze. "Because I am the last servant remaining in this house." 6 hours earlier, Leander had believed replacing his wife would require only one announcement. By dinner, that announcement had emptied his palace. 6 hours earlier, Duchess Rosamond Hawkridge stood beneath the carved archway of the Great Hall while her husband publicly removed her authority. She did not cry. That unsettled Leander more than tears would have. The household had been summoned shortly after noon. 48 indoor servants, 30 estate workers, and nearly every tenant capable of leaving the fields. They stood in perfect rows as the Duke descended the staircase beside Lady Corisande. Rosamond waited below. At 34, she possessed none of Corisande's theatrical beauty. Her chestnut hair was simply arranged, her blue-grey dress carried no jewels, and an old leather account book rested beneath her arm. Yet everyone in the hall watched Rosamond. Almost no one watched the woman replacing her. Leander stopped upon the final step. "For 12 years," he announced, "the Duchess of Alderwick has managed Caldermere's domestic household and charitable affairs." Rosamond heard the careful limitation. Domestic household, charitable affairs. As though those were the only responsibilities she had carried. Leander continued. "Her methods have become unnecessarily restrictive. Caldermere requires a younger, more sociable presence, someone capable of restoring this house to its proper magnificence." Corisande lifted her chin. A murmur moved through the servants. Leander ignored it. "From this moment, Lady Corisande Vellum will direct the household, approve its expenditures, and preside over all social occasions." Rosamond looked at her husband. "Are you finished?" The bluntness startled him. You may address me privately. You dismissed me publicly. I will answer publicly. Corisande moved closer to Leander. There is no need for unpleasantness. Rosamond's eyes shifted toward the emeralds around Corisande's neck. No, she replied. You appear to have taken everything pleasantly. A few servants lowered their heads to hide their reactions. Leander's face hardened. You will spend the remainder of the season at Greyhaven Lodge. Greyhaven was an isolated house near the northern marshes. It had not been occupied in 11 years. You prepared Greyhaven for me, Rosamond asked. The lodge can be opened. That was not my question. Leander hesitated. He had not inspected it. He had merely chosen the farthest property belonging to the dukedom. Rosamond closed the ledger. When am I expected to leave? Immediately. Then I shall. Her calm agreement unsettled the room more than anger would have. Leander had expected her to plead for time. He had imagined she would remind him of 12 years of marriage, appeal to his duty, or beg him not to humiliate her before the county. Instead, Rosamond turned toward the assembled servants. You have heard His Grace's decision. Mrs. Plymley, the housekeeper, stepped out of line. What will happen to the winter relief accounts, Your Grace? Lady Corisande will direct them, Leander answered. The housekeeper did not look at him. Her eyes remained on Rosamond. And the tenants' grain fund? Lady Corisande, Leander repeated. The head gardener raised his hand. What of the medicinal garden and the village infirmary? Corisande smiled as if comforting children. I am certain we can discuss every little project later. The gardener's expression changed at the word little. Rosamond opened her account book and placed it on a marble table. This contains the household schedule, supplier contracts and current obligations. Corisande reached for it. Rosamond kept one hand upon the cover. There are 317 people whose winter provisions depend upon decisions recorded in this ledger. I understand accounts, Corisande replied. Do you understand them well enough to know why the southern tenant rents were reduced after the March flooding? Corisande glanced at Leander. That can be explained to me. Do you know which merchant has been delivering spoiled flour? No. Which bridge must not carry a loaded wagon? No. Which servants support elderly parents from their wages? Corisande's smile vanished. Rosamond released the ledger. Then I suggest you begin reading. She walked toward the doors. Leander called after her. You have forgotten your place. Rosamond stopped. Every servant listened. For 12 years, she said without turning, my place was wherever this estate was failing. Then she left Caldermere House with one travelling case. The first resignation. Mrs. Plymley entered the morning room 20 minutes later. Corisande was examining fabric samples for new curtains. These brown draperies are dreadful, she said. The room requires gold silk. Mrs. Plymley placed a folded paper beside her. What is this? Corisande asked. My resignation. Leander lowered the letter he had been reading. You have served this family for 26 years. I served this household. You are confusing the two. No, Your Grace. Today, I finally understand the difference. Leander stood. If this is an attempt to force me to recall the Duchess, it is not. Then why are you leaving? Mrs. Plymley looked at Corisande. Her ladyship's first instruction was to dismiss 6 kitchen maids and use their wages to purchase flowers for tonight's dinner. Corisande folded her arms. Caldermere employs too many servants. Those 6 women prepare the bread distributed to the village each Thursday. That is not the household's responsibility. It became our responsibility when last year's harvest failed, Leander interrupted. You may disagree with an instruction. You may not abandon your position. Mrs. Plymley removed the silver ring of household keys from her waist. The Duchess never asked us to remain where we were not valued. She placed the keys on the table and walked out. The resignations followed one at a time. The cook left after Corisande cancelled the servants' supper to reduce expenses. 2 footmen resigned when Leander ordered them to carry Rosamond's belongings into a storage cart instead of the covered carriage she had used for 12 years. The stable master departed when Corisande attempted to sell 3 aging horses Rosamond had promised would remain in retirement. By 4 o'clock, 27 servants were gone. Leander refused to be alarmed. They will return when they remember who pays them. Belfry, standing near the door, replied quietly, "That may be the difficulty, Your Grace." Leander turned. "What difficulty?" The steward glanced toward the ledger Rosamond had left behind. "Her Grace paid many of them." Leander laughed. "My wife has no independent income large enough to maintain this staff. No, but 3 years ago, when Culdemir's revenues failed, she sold her mother's jewels to cover the household wages." The laughter died. Leander had noticed the missing jewels. Rosamond had told him they were being reset. He had never asked again. Belfry continued. "When the eastern cottages collapsed, Her Grace used her marriage allowance to rebuild them. When the infirmary faced closure, she surrendered that allowance entirely." Corisande looked toward the emeralds she was wearing. Leander closed the ledger. "One woman's generosity does not give her ownership of my servants." Belfry's expression became grave. "They do not believe anyone owns them." The empty table. Now, as 20 guests waited for a dinner that would never arrive, Leander understood that Belfry had been warning him. The steward removed the Coldemere insignia from his coat and placed it beside the Duke's plate. "You are resigning too?" Leander asked. "Yes, Your Grace." "Where have they all gone?" Belfry glanced at Corisande. "To Greyhaven." Leander almost laughed. "Greyhaven is barely habitable. It was this morning." "What does that mean?" "Carpenters arrived before noon. Villagers repaired the roof. The servants carried beds, provisions and kitchen equipment after leaving Coldemere." Corisande pushed back her chair. "They stole household property." "No. Everything taken belonged personally to the Duchess." Leander looked down the long table. "The food? Purchased through accounts held in Her Grace's name. The wine? Provided by a merchant she prevented you from dismissing last year. The silver? Mortgaged." That final word changed the room. Leander's guests stopped pretending not to listen. "What do you mean, mortgaged?" Belfry removed a sealed letter from inside his coat. "A representative from Mortain Bank delivered this after the Duchess departed." Leander broke the seal. His eyes moved rapidly across the page. The bank had suspended Caldemir's credit. 3 loans required immediate review. No supplier would release further goods without payment. At the bottom of the letter was the reason. The guarantor protecting the estate's accounts had formally withdrawn her name. Rosamond Hawkridge. Leander read it again. Then a third time. Corisande leaned closer. "Is something wrong?" Before he could answer, the front doors opened somewhere beyond the hall. A young messenger hurried into the dining room carrying another sealed packet. "For His Grace." Leander tore it open. This message came from the county council. The following morning, Caldemir's tenants would vote on whether to transfer their produce, labour contracts and market rights into a new independent association. The meeting would be held at Greyhaven Lodge. Its temporary director was Duchess Rosamond. Leander looked at Belfry. "My wife is taking my estate." "No, Your Grace." "Then what is she doing?" The old steward glanced at the empty plates. "She is showing everyone how much of it was never truly yours." Belfry bowed for the final time and walked out. At the table, 20 hungry guests stared at the Duke of Alderwick. Corisande slowly removed Rosamond's emerald necklace. And from somewhere across the darkened valley, a bell began to ring at Greyhaven Lodge. Once, twice, then 48 times, one for every servant who had chosen where they would serve next. Leander remained standing before his empty plate, holding the council notice. By morning, he would have to enter a room filled with the servants, tenants and merchants he had taken for granted, and the wife he had replaced would be seated at its head. By 9 the following morning, the road to Greyhaven was crowded. Tenant farmers came in wagons, mill workers walked beside them, merchants arrived carrying contracts beneath their coats. Caldermere's former servants stood near the lodge entrance in their formal black clothing, as though preparing to receive an important guest. They were. Duchess Rosamond stood inside the restored assembly room, facing more than 100 people whose futures had once depended upon her husband's decisions. In less than one day, Greyhaven had changed. The broken windows had been covered. The leaking roof had been repaired. Long tables filled the central room, supporting maps, ledgers, and baskets of local produce. Everything had been prepared without using a single coin belonging to the Duke. Rosamond looked toward the mantel clock. "His Grace has 3 minutes." Mrs. Plymley approached her. "Do you believe he will come?" "He will come." "You sound certain." "My husband has ignored warnings, debts, and people, but he has never ignored a challenge to his authority." Outside, carriage wheels struck the frozen road. The room fell silent. Duke Leander entered alone. No footman opened the door for him. No steward announced his name. No servant removed his coat. For the first time in his adult life, the Duke of Alderwick entered one of his own properties, like an ordinary visitor. He found Rosamond seated at the head of the room. "That is my chair," he said. "No," she replied, "it belongs to the temporary director of this meeting. You summoned my tenants to vote against me. They requested the vote." Leander looked around. "Anyone who transfers his produce or labour into this association will lose the protection of Caldermere." A farmer rose from the second row. It was Mr. Jerrow, whose family had cultivated Hawkridge land for 40 years. "What protection, Your Grace?" Leander stared at him. "The eastern grain stores have been broken since February," Jerrow continued. "The South Bridge has not been repaired. 2 merchants refused our produce because Caldermere still owes them money. Those problems are being addressed." "By whom?" another tenant asked. No one answered. Rosamond opened the leather account book. "Caldermere owes £37,000. The room stirred. Leander's expression tightened. "This meeting has no authority to examine private estate accounts. Those accounts determine whether these families will be paid. You had no right to bring that ledger here. You gave it to Lady Corisande." "I did not give it to you." "She returned it." Leander's eyes narrowed. "Why?" Rosamond looked toward the entrance. Lady Corisande stood there. She wore a plain travelling gown. The Hawkridge emeralds were gone. For once, she did not enter a room expecting admiration. She entered expecting judgment. The woman who had been promised everything. Leander crossed the room. "What are you doing here?" Corisande placed several papers on the nearest table, correcting a misunderstanding. "You have nothing to explain to these people." "I believe I do." She faced the tenants. "His Grace told me Caldermere was prosperous. He said the Duchess had become difficult and unnecessarily cautious. He said replacing her would release money for entertainments, renovations, and a grander social season." Rosamond watched without interruption. Corisande continued. "Yesterday, I discovered there is no available money. The household suppliers have not been paid in 4 months. Several servants received wages from the Duchess's personal accounts, and the estate's largest loans were protected by her signature." Leander lowered his voice. "You will return to Caldermere immediately." "No." The single word surprised everyone, including Corisande herself. "You accepted the position I offered you," Leander said. "I accepted a lie. You accepted my protection. You cannot protect me from an empty dining table." A few tenants murmured their agreement. Leander looked at Rosamond. "You arranged this." "No," Rosamond said. "You did." Corisande placed the emerald necklace beside the ledger. "I will not wear jewels belonging to a woman whose place I was invited to steal." Rosamond studied her carefully. "Why bring the account book?" "Because there is something inside it neither of you has seen." She opened the rear cover and removed a folded letter hidden beneath the lining. Leander recognized the seal. Mortain Bank. Coruscant handed the letter to Rosamond. It was dated 4 months earlier. The bank had warned Leander that unless £12,000 was paid before the end of the month, Caldermere's western farms would be placed under financial supervision. "You received this?" Rosamond asked. Leander said nothing. "You knew the estate was approaching insolvency. I expected the autumn rents to cover it. The autumn rents were reduced after the floods." "You reduced them because the tenants lost half their harvest, and now they stand inside my lodge preparing to betray me." Mr. Gero rose again. "We are not leaving because the Duchess reduced our rents. We are considering leaving because you borrowed against land we were still expected to repair." Leander turned on Rosamond. "What are you offering them?" She directed everyone's attention to the maps on the table. The Caldermere Agricultural and Trading Association. Every participating tenant contributes a portion of produce rather than surrendering it to the estate's merchants. The association negotiates prices collectively, maintains its own storage, and guarantees fair payment. "You intend to replace my market rights?" "No. The tenants intend to stop depending upon them. You cannot transport grain without using Caldermere's roads. The northern route crosses Greyhaven. The lodge belongs to me." Rosamond removed another document from the ledger. "Greyhaven was included in my marriage settlement. You may hold the ducal title, but this house and 400 surrounding acres belong to me." Leander took the document and examined it. His own father's signature appeared at the bottom. For 12 years, Leander had regarded Greyhaven as an insignificant piece of Caldermere. Now it was the one property untouched by his debts, and Rosamond controlled it. The first ballot. The council magistrate stood. The tenants must decide whether to join the proposed association. Each registered holding receives 1 vote. Leander stepped toward the ballot table. Before anyone votes, they should understand the consequences. Caldermere provides their cottages, fields and grazing rights. Rosamond closed her ledger. "And Caldermere depends upon their labour. That is not the same." "No," she replied. "They can survive without your dinners. You cannot survive without their harvest." The first farmer collected his ballot. Then the miller. Then the dairy tenants. Soon, a line stretched across the room. Leander watched one person after another approach the voting box. He recognized people whose petitions he had never read. Men who had repaired his roads, women who had supplied his kitchens, families whose rents appeared in his accounts, but whose faces he had never bothered to remember. Then he noticed something else. Not everyone was voting. 9 tenant representatives remained seated. If they opposed Rosamond, the association might fail to secure enough land and produce to survive its first winter. Leander approached their leader, a broad-shouldered farmer named Abel Draycott. "You understand what she is asking you to risk?" Draycott nodded. "If the association fails," Leander continued, "I will not renew the leases of anyone who joined it." Rosamond heard him. "So that is your protection," she said. "Obedience purchased with the fear of losing a home. It is called enforcing an agreement." Draycott looked between them. "My family's lease ends in 6 weeks. If we vote with Her Grace, can Greyhaven give us land?" Rosamond hesitated. Her 400 acres could not support every tenant Leander might remove. "I will help you," she said, "but I cannot promise land I do not possess." Leander almost smiled. At last, Rosamond had reached the limit of what she could offer. Draycott returned to his seat without voting. The other 8 uncertain tenants followed him. The magistrate began counting the ballots. 31 supported the association. 22 opposed it. 9 had abstained. The association had won a majority, but without Draycott's farms, its grain volume would be too small to honour the contracts Rosamond had prepared. Leander understood immediately. You have won a vote for an association that cannot meet its first order. Rosamond looked at the contract awaiting her signature. He was right. Greyhaven needed 300 additional sacks of grain. Without them, the merchant waiting outside would withdraw, and the tenants would lose confidence before the association began. Leander approached her. "End this spectacle. Return to Caldermere. Dismiss these plans and resume your duties." The room became still. Rosamond looked at him. "Under what authority?" "As my wife. Yesterday, you told this household I was no longer fit to hold authority. Yesterday was poorly handled." A quiet disbelief moved through the room. Rosamond's voice remained calm. "You replaced me before nearly 80 people, sent me to an unprepared lodge, and gave another woman my jewels. Now that you have discovered the estate requires my name, you call your decision poorly handled." Leander lowered his voice. "If you return, I will restore your position." "My position? As Duchess of Caldermere. I never stopped being your Duchess. You simply stopped treating me as one." The offer, hidden inside an apology. The meeting paused while the magistrate prepared the final registration. Leander followed Rosamond into the lodge library. £37,000, she said, closing the door. "How did the debt become so large?" "Caldermere required investment." "What investment?" "The London residence, the racing stable, the summer celebrations. You borrowed against farms to pay for parties." "I was preserving the family's standing. You were decorating a reputation while the estate beneath it collapsed." Leander placed both hands on the desk. "If Mortain Bank takes control, every person outside that room will suffer. That is why I created the association. It is too small. For now, the merchant will withdraw today." Rosamond said nothing. Leander saw his advantage. "Return to Caldermere and restore your guarantee. I will dismiss Coruscant from household affairs." "You still believe this is about Coruscant. You want her gone. I want the estate governed responsibly." "Then govern it." Rosamond studied him. "What are you offering?" "Complete authority over the household and tenant accounts. And the debts. You will negotiate with Mortain." "With what power?" Leander removed a document from his coat. "If you sign this, the bank will accept your guarantee again." Rosamond read the first page. It appeared to restore her authority. Then she reached the final clause. "Every Greyhaven property, including the lodge and its 400 acres, would become security for Caldermere's debts." She looked up. "You did not come to apologize." "I came to save the estate. With the only property the bank cannot seize, our properties should not be divided. They were not divided when Caldermere benefited from my money. They became divided only when I asked who had spent it." Leander reached for the document. Rosamond held it beyond his grasp. "If I sign this, Greyhaven becomes liable for your £37,000. If the estate defaults, the bank takes everything I could use to protect the tenants. It will not default once you return." "And if I refuse?" Leander's eyes hardened. "The 9 remaining farms will stay with Caldermere. Your association will lose its merchant. By next month, those who followed you will be asking me for their old contracts." Rosamond finally understood. Her husband had not followed her to Greyhaven because he had learned her value. He had come because he intended to use it again. She tore the guarantee in half. Leander stared at the pieces. "Then you have condemned the people outside that door?" "No," Rosamond replied. "You are simply disappointed that I will not rescue you in the same way twice." The man at the northern gate. They returned to the assembly room. The merchant who had promised to purchase Greyhaven grain was preparing to leave. "I respect what you are attempting, Your Grace," he told Rosamond. "But I cannot contract for produce the association does not possess." Draycott and the other uncertain farmers looked away. Leander stood near the doors, confident the rebellion was ending. Then carriage wheels sounded outside. This was not a nobleman's polished carriage. It was a long commercial wagon, dark blue and marked with the silver compass of West Harbour trading. The room erupted into whispers. West Harbour was one of the largest grain buyers in the northern counties. A tall man entered, carrying a leather dispatch case. "Mr. Gideon Marlowe," he introduced himself, "Director of West Harbour Trading." Leander frowned. "I know your company. You have no business at Greyhaven." Marlowe looked directly at Rosamond. "I was invited by the Duchess." Rosamond appeared equally surprised. "I sent no invitation." "No. But 3 years ago, you prevented Culdamere from cancelling our contract when our warehouse failed." Leander remembered the dispute. He had wanted to sue West Harbour. Rosamond had negotiated delayed payment instead. Marlowe opened his case. "My company recovered because you gave us time. Yesterday, 48 former Culdamere servants purchased small shares in West Harbour using their unpaid benefit funds." Mrs. Plymley stepped forward. Rosamond stared at her. "You invested your savings." "We invested in the one company willing to invest in you." Marlowe placed a contract on the table. "West Harbour will purchase every sack the association can produce, advance the first season's payment, and finance the northern storage barns." Leander's face changed. "That cannot be enough." "It is not," Marlowe agreed, "which is why we also negotiated with farmers from Dunmere and Ashcombe. They are prepared to join the association as independent suppliers. Those estates bordered Culdamere. If they joined Rosamond, the association would control more grain than Leander's remaining farms." Abel Draycott stood. "If farmers need not surrender their leases to participate, my vote changes." One by one, the other 8 tenants approached the ballot box. The magistrate counted again. This time, the association received 40 votes. Leander had lost the grain contracts. He had lost the servants. And before noon, he would lose the market income upon which Mortain Bank expected him to repay its loans. Marlowe gave Rosamond one final envelope. "This arrived at our offices before dawn. The bank required it to be delivered only after the association was formally approved." Rosamond opened the letter. Her face became pale. "What is it?" Mrs. Plymley asked. Rosamond looked at Leander. "Mortain Bank has begun a formal review of Culdamere's title." Leander laughed once. "A bank cannot question my title." "It can when the title was used to secure loans." She read the final paragraph. "The previous Duke of Alderwick had created a restriction. No heir could borrow more than £20,000 against Culdamere without the written agreement of his wife or the estate council. Leander had borrowed 37,000. Rosamond had never signed. Neither had the council. Every loan beyond the limit might be declared his personal debt rather than Culdamere's obligation. The estate could survive. But Leander might lose his private fortune, his London residence, and everything he had purchased for Lady Corisande. He seized the letter. Who informed the bank of this restriction? The lodge doors opened again. Mr. Belfry entered carrying a narrow wooden box. "I did, Your Grace." Leander stared at his former steward. Belfry placed the box before Rosamond. Inside lay the late Duke's original estate council seal, and a list of every unauthorized loan Leander had taken during the previous 5 years. Rosamond looked from the documents to her husband. She had believed he had merely ignored Culdamere's problems. Now she saw something worse. He had hidden the true danger from her while using her reputation to keep creditors calm. The magistrate cleared his throat. "Until the financial review is complete, His Grace may be suspended from directing Culdamere's commercial affairs." Leander's face emptied of colour. "And who would direct them?" The magistrate looked at Rosamond. "Under the late Duke's restriction, authority passes temporarily to the spouse whose consent was unlawfully avoided." Everyone turned toward her. Rosamond had left Culdamere with one travelling case. Less than 24 hours later, the law was preparing to place its entire financial future in her hands. But Leander stepped closer and whispered something only she could hear. "If you accept, the bank will uncover where the final £12,000 went." Rosamond looked at him sharply. "What did you do?" Leander's gaze shifted toward Lady Corisande. Corisande's face revealed that she knew the answer. And whatever Leander had purchased with that missing money was serious enough to destroy more than his fortune. Rosamond did not ask her husband to repeat himself. She turned to Lady Corisande. What did he purchase? Corisande gripped the back of a chair. The confidence she had worn at Coldemere was gone. Not here, Leander warned. Rosamond faced the crowded assembly room. Every person here may lose a home because of what you concealed. Whatever happened to those £12,000 will be discussed here. Leander lowered his voice. If you expose this, the Hawkridge name will not recover. The Hawkridge name is painted over every door at Coldemere, Rosamond replied. It survived while the people behind those doors went unpaid. I am no longer interested in protecting a name from the truth. She looked at Corisande again. What did he buy? Corisande reached into her travelling bag and removed a document bound with a crimson ribbon. Leander moved toward her. Give me that. Mr. Belfry stepped between them. For 30 years the steward had bowed whenever a Hawkridge entered a room. This time he did not move aside. Corisande placed the document before Rosamond. I did not understand what it was when I signed. Rosamond read the heading. Assignment of commercial securities and default rights. The document transferred control of several unpaid Coldemere obligations to a private company called Vellum Holdings. Rosamond looked up. Vellum? Corisande's face filled with shame. The company was created in my name. The magistrate took the document and examined its seals. These securities cover the Western grain warehouses, the southern dairy lands, and 11 tenant cottages. A shocked murmur swept through the room. Abel Draycott rose so quickly that his chair struck the wall. My cottage is on the southern dairy land. Rosamond's gaze returned to Leander. You borrowed against Coldemere, used part of the loan to purchase its unpaid securities through a private company, and placed that company in Corisande's name. Leander tried to maintain his composure. It was a protective arrangement. For whom? For the family. Which family? He did not answer. Rosamond understood the scheme. If Coldemere defaulted, Mortain Bank would seize the London residence, racing stable and other properties securing the legal portion of the loans. But Vellum Holdings would claim the western warehouses, dairy lands and cottages. Leander would lose the estate publicly while retaining its most profitable assets privately through Corisande. The debts would remain with Coldemere. The valuable properties would not, and the tenants living upon those lands could be removed. You planned the collapse, Rosamond whispered. I planned for the possibility of it. You knew the estate could not repay its loans. I knew Coldemere had become inefficient. The estate was not inefficient. You emptied it. Leander looked around at the angry tenants. Those lands require modern management, smaller leases, fewer labourers, and higher rents would make them profitable again. Draycott stepped forward. Fewer labourers means families dismissed. It means necessary reform. And the cottages? Rosamond asked. Leander's silence answered her. Corisande stared at him. You told me Vellum Holdings was my protection if the Duchess forced me to leave. It would have protected you. By taking their homes. You were never expected to concern yourself with those details. Corisande recoiled, as though the words had finally shown her what becoming mistress of Coldemere truly meant. She had believed Leander intended to replace his wife. Now she discovered he had also intended to replace everyone who made the estate function. The choice before Rosamond. Magistrate Pell placed the documents beside the council seal. These transactions may constitute deliberate concealment from creditors. Leander's expression changed. Until that moment, he had treated the gathering as another disagreement he could overpower. Now he understood that the evidence could follow him beyond Greyhaven. If the bank discovers everything, he said to Rosamond, it may freeze every Coldemere account. The accounts are already empty. Suppliers will withdraw. They already have. The family will be disgraced. Rosamond closed the ledger. The servants left. The tenants formed their own association. Your guests sat before empty plates while you discovered you could not command loyalty with a bell. The disgrace has already happened, Leander. You simply want it kept private. He approached her. You can still prevent this. How? Accept temporary control. Tell the bank you approved the securities. The restriction will be satisfied. You want me to place my name beneath your deception. I am asking you to preserve Caldermere. No, you are asking me to save you. For the first time, his voice softened. Rosamond, we have been married for 12 years, and yesterday you replaced me in 6 hours. I made a mistake. A mistake is forgetting a promise. This required lawyers, false companies, and hidden accounts. Leander glanced toward the villagers. What do you want from me? The question silenced the room. Perhaps he expected her to demand the London house, his fortune, or a public declaration restoring her authority. Instead, Rosamond answered, nothing. He stared at her. I do not want your permission, your borrowed money, or the position you offered to return when you became desperate. Then what will you do? I will accept temporary control of Caldermere. Relief flickered across his face. Then Rosamond continued, but I will not protect you from the investigation. His relief vanished. I will separate every lawful estate debt from your private borrowing. Vellum Holdings will surrender its claims. Caldermere's profitable properties will remain with the estate, and no tenant will lose a cottage because of your scheme. You cannot make that decision alone. No, Rosamond agreed, which is why the estate council will be restored. She faced the magistrate. Every major loan, land sale and commercial agreement will require the council's approval. The tenants will select 2 representatives. The workers will select 1. The household will select 1. Leander almost laughed. You would allow servants to govern a dukedom, Mrs. Plymley answered, before Rosamond could. We governed it yesterday, when everyone else was waiting for dinner. Even the magistrate struggled to hide his reaction. The woman who returned the power. Corisande picked up the Vellum Holdings document. I will surrender every security transferred into my name. Leander turned sharply. You have no idea what you are giving away. I am giving away something that was never mine. She signed a declaration relinquishing the company's claims. Then she removed a second paper from her bag. It was Leander's promise to grant her Greywick Manor after the winter season. The manor belonged to Caldermere's inheritance and could not legally be given away without council approval. Corisande tore the promise in half. I wanted the life you described, she told him, but every beautiful room you promised me was built upon someone else being forced out of it. She looked at Rosamond. I do not expect forgiveness. Good, Rosamond said. Forgiveness should never be demanded as payment for finally telling the truth. Corisande accepted the answer. Before leaving Greyhaven, she agreed to testify before Mortain Bank. She departed without jewels, property, or the household position she had enjoyed for less than 1 day. But she left carrying something Leander still did not possess, the willingness to admit what she had done. The Duke without a household. Mortain Bank's investigation lasted 6 weeks. The lawful portion of Caldermere's debt remained attached to the estate. The unauthorized loans, the racing stable, the London residence, and Leander's private purchases were declared his personal responsibility. The London house was sold. The racing stable followed. The money repaid the merchants and household suppliers he had ignored. Vellum Holdings was dissolved, and every threatened farm and cottage returned to Caldermere without additional debt. Leander retained his title, but a title was almost all he retained. Under the late Duke's restriction, he was suspended from financial control until every personal obligation had been settled, and the estate council judged him fit to return. Rosamond could have permanently removed him from Caldermere House. She chose something more instructive. She allowed him to remain. The first evening after the decision, Leander entered the dining room and found one place prepared at the long table. A simple bowl of stew waited beside a piece of bread. No guests, no emeralds, no grand announcement. Belfry stood near the doors, having agreed to return as steward under the new council. Leander sat. He waited for someone to pour his water. No one moved. Belfry nodded toward the jug. Leander looked at it as though it were an unfamiliar instrument. Then he lifted it and filled his own glass. The next morning, he attended his first estate council meeting. Draycott sat across from him. Mrs. Plymley occupied the chair beside Rosamond. The head gardener represented the outdoor workers, while two tenant farmers held the final seats. Leander was permitted to speak. He was not permitted to command. For a man who had once believed every bell should summon obedience, listening became the hardest labour of his life. 1 year later, Greyhaven's association expanded across 3 neighbouring estates. Its storage barns were completed before the following harvest, and West Harbour paid the farmers directly for their produce. Caldermere recovered slowly. The grand dinners became smaller. The racing trophies disappeared from the entrance hall. Several unused guest rooms became offices for the association and classrooms for tenants' children during winter. Rosamond never resumed the life she had lived before. She divided her time between Greyhaven and Caldermere, directing the council, but refusing to guarantee another loan with her private property. One autumn evening, she entered the dining room and found Leander arranging plates. The servants were attending the annual association celebration at Greyhaven. He had dismissed the suggestion that they return early to serve him. "You prepared dinner?" Rosamond asked. "I attempted it." She examined the uneven bread and overcooked vegetables. "Caldermere has survived worse." He almost smiled, but the expression faded. "I thought authority meant never having to notice how anything reached the table." Rosamond remained near the doorway. "And now I know a dinner is the final result of 100 promises. Wages paid. Fields maintained, merchants trusted, servants respected." He placed a second plate opposite his. "I did not know whether you would come." "You still do not." He nodded. There was no demand in his face. No hidden document waited beside the plate. No position was being offered in exchange for her return. Rosamond sat, but not in her former chair. She chose the seat opposite him. It was not forgiveness. It was not reconciliation. It was the first honest conversation of their marriage. Beyond the windows, wagons travelled along the northern road, carrying grain belonging to the farmers who had grown it. The cottages remained occupied. The servants received proper wages, and every major decision passed through a council that could challenge the Duke. Leander had once replaced his wife because he believed her work was invisible. Then he sat down to dinner and discovered that everything he possessed depended upon the people he had refused to see. Rosamond did not reclaim her old place. She created a better one, where her authority could never again be removed by a single announcement, and where no person at Caldermere existed merely to answer another man's bell.